Mr. Anthony Carver. Anthony was raised on a farm up in Hawkins County in East Tennessee. Him and his dad had about a 2-acre garden, so big, ambitious kind of garden. They had about 30 mama cows back then, raised tobacco, several acres of hay in production back then, and raised beagle pups. So pretty neat background. He's got a lot of experience in agriculture, and we welcome Anthony. He attended Walters State Community College, finished his bachelor's degree in plant and soil science at University of Tennessee, and he began his career with the University of Tennessee Extension up in Grainger County 25 years ago. So we want to welcome Mr. Anthony Carver as our speaker tonight on tomato production, and we'll rock and roll, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Anthony. He's got his slides up, and he is ready to roll.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for letting me speak with y'all tonight. I'm sorry about my voice, and you might hear me sneeze or blow my nose in between some of these. Hopefully not, but I took a bad sinus infection late last night, and it's been a rough day today. I only had missed one meeting that I know of in my 5 years, and I wouldn't want to miss this one. So me and Billy had talked a little bit about what we talked about in as far as tomatoes go, and I felt like I had covered tomatoes back a few years back, but I felt like this is something that we need to cover. Is when I think about a garden, or if I think about even commercial production, I think about the fertility of the plants. To me, it's the base. If you do not get your fertility right, you're not going to get a good garden whatsoever, or a good commercial crop. So taking this, we're going to deal some basic type of stuff, and then we'll build our way up into some things. And you may know a lot of what I'm getting ready to talk about, but hopefully it's in some of this, and that will help you produce whatever you're growing back at home. So we'll get started, and I entitled this for what the plant really needs. And so we'll move through this as quick as we can. Some of the things we're going to be covering tonight, we'll be looking at our soils. We'll be looking at the major nutrients, of course, at the N, P, and K. That's always the 3 numbers that's on any fertilizer bag. We'll also cover some calcium, some magnesium, some boron, some of the micronutrients that we don't normally think about, but we'll cover some of those as well. And we're going to kind of get started with the pH, and we'll kind of work backwards on some of this, and we'll kind of see what happens as we go. I always like to talk about pH. To me, pH is extremely important in our soils. If your pH is not right, what happens is whenever it falls out of the boundaries of or whatever crop we're growing, the soil itself will truly hold back the nutrients, N, P, and K, from the root system. And so if we don't have our pH right, we can put fertilizer on, but part of that is going to be tied up in the soil itself, and it's not truly readily available to our crop. So pH really is the hydrogen ions that is tied to the soil surface. I'm going to show you some examples of that in just a few minutes. But the more hydrogen that is in the soil, the more acid it is. I loved it. But the one thing that I did, I think it was late 2023, and I started studying. It took 6 months, and I studied pH and lime and things of that nature. And I called all over the United States. I talked with all kinds of laboratories. I talked with all kinds of extension research. I talked with all kinds of people who would even answer me a question of mine. I would talk to them. But this chart, what I'm showing you right here on this side, I wanted to show you that pH, if you don't do anything, if you don't add lime, if you don't add sulfur, you don't do anything, look, watch this, the pH is actually moving throughout the year. Now, in college, we talked about pH truly just starting up here and actually just dropping down. But that's not truly the case. It truly acts like a wave of the ocean. So sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down, sometimes it's up again, sometimes it's making its way back down. I show you this to tell you that if your pH, and I'll show you what the optimum range is of pH, but let's say our pH is at 6. Sometime during the year, it's going to be lower than 6. And so the next slide, I'm going to show you, where we need to be starting at. But if we start at 6 and our pH drops below 6, then sometime of these, this is a 24-month period right now here, but sometime during those 2 years, your crop will not have the nutrients needed. Why? Because the soil itself is tying up the nutrients that the root systems could use. So in this slide, we're seeing here our optimum range for most crops is usually 6.2 to 7.3. And now, unless you're growing blueberries or azaleas, they like to be way down in here. But these bars, the thicker they are, the more readily available those nutrients are to our roots. So most of our garden crops are always going to be right around this 6.2 to 7.3 range. Now, I like to soil test in the fall of the year. You can soil test anytime. And we're going to talk a little bit about soil testing because they make me say that about soil testing, they'll fire me and send me on to the house. But soil testing is extremely important. But I like doing mine in the fall of the year. And the reason I do that is because I like to know that my soil is as poor as it's going to be at that time. Why? Because it went through the spring, it's went through the summer, it's used all the nutrients up, and the root system has taken it up and things of that nature. And so at that time, the soil really is as poor as it can be. I also like putting my lime on if needed, if you know about it, in the fall of the year. Why? Because it does take at least 6 months for the lime to truly break down and raise your pH. Now, some of the studies I have seen is, especially in non-tilled land, your yards, your pasture, your hay ground, things of that nature that's not tilled up, it even takes sometimes 8 months to even up to 18 months to truly get the full benefit of the lime that is added to your soil, because it has to go through the breakdown processes and things of that nature. So it's good to take soil samples, especially ever so often, so that our pH doesn't drop down lower than what it needs to be, so that we don't get behind the 8 ball. It takes a long, long time to get our pH back to where it really needs to be. Well, I have to say something about tomatoes. And because Grainger County, we like to grow tomatoes up here, and I'm sure everybody likes to grow a tomato in their garden. But the pH truly should be on tomatoes and a lot of other crops in our garden at 6.5 to 6.8. And the reason is we like to keep that pH as high up as possible because there's a lot of wilts. There's a fusarium wilt, verticillium wilt, there's some pythiums, there's some soil-borne diseases that are naturally controlled if our pH is up around 6.5 or higher. So just by getting your pH right, you're already doing some disease control. And I'll show you some of those diseases here in just a few minutes. But it's good to have your pH up as high as you can, so that because again, it's like a wave, it's going to be up and down a little bit, so that even if it's at 6.5, it'll drop down some, and the nutrients are still available to the root system. And it's already doing some disease control for you in your garden spot. I love showing this slide. This, to me, speaks just how amazing God really is. And I'll kind of walk us through this. But a lot of people say, well, I've heard about adding lime, and what does that do? It raises your pH. Can you explain that to me? I said, sure. So we've got a piece of soil here. And in most cases, it's negatively charged. And we got these hydrogen ions I talked about that's connected to this soil. So this is an acid soil. Then all along we say, well, we add lime. I've heard Dad say we ought to add lime because it's blah, blah, blah. It's really good for the soil. Well, what does it really do? We got acid soil. We add lime. Lime is calcium and carbon and oxygen. What happens then is that calcium knocks off the hydrogen and connects to the soil. All right, here it is. It's connected to the soil. Now, first benefit is our soil is not acid anymore. Now we've got higher pH, and our nutrients that are in the soil naturally are readily available to our roots. All right, what else happens? Whenever that hydrogen jumps off, it connects to the oxygen and creates water. Now, what do we need in our soil? we need some water, don't we? That's kind of amazing. And then all of a sudden we have this C and O get together because of what's in the lime. And now we have carbon dioxide that gases off. Now, I don't know about you, but plants, I know that plants need a lot of this. Let's show you what that looks like. Get this going forward here. Now that we got water and carbon dioxide, we have carbon dioxide plus water with a whole lot of sunshine creates photosynthesis in our leaves and in our plants. And guess what that does? That creates a whole lot of sugar, which glucose, which is sugar, which the plant uses for food. And then it releases oxygen. And I don't know about you, but I'm a little bit hard breathing this today because I've got sinus infection, but I need a lot of oxygen. So to me, that's just an amazing combination of really walking us through how important actually even adding lime to an acid soil really is. I mean, it's just creating a whole cycle of events that truly helps the plant, helps the soil, and helps us. To me, I think that's kind of an amazing deal. The more I study, the more I'm amazed with what God can do. All right, so like I said, I have to say something about soil testing. So soil testing is, if you don't know what you've got, if you don't never measure it, you don't really know what you've got. So the best way of doing it, and I've seen a lot of people take soil samples, and some of them just don't know what to do, or they just don't do it right. The easiest way, let's say you've got a garden spot right here, start in the corner, get you a bucket, get you something to dig with. And I like taking a little screwdriver with me so I can mix up the soil and just start zigzagging that whole area. Let's say you've got a garden spot 150 by 50. You just start at the corner and start zigzagging. Stop randomly, dig down 6 inches. All you need is a little sliver of soil. That's a real small sliver of soil. Stick that in that bucket. You do that at least 8 to 15 times. The bigger the area, the more samples I want. What you're doing, then you put that in that bucket and you just stir it up like crazy. And you, of course, send it off to the laboratory, and you get a really good average of what that entire plot is doing. If you don't mix it up, if you don't take enough samples, sometimes you just go out and you might find the very best place, and you've got an excellent soil sample, but the rest of it's no good. Or you might go out and find that really bad spot. So I like taking a whole lot of samples in that one area because it averages the entire spot, and you truly know what's happening in that whole plot, that whole area. And so we'll get a soil sample back, and these sometimes can be just as clear as mud. And so I like kind of walking through. First, you need to look at pH. And this is an actual garden spot that is here in Grainger County. You'll notice that the pH is 7.2. Now, I said the optimum range is 6.0 at least to 7.3. So what does this first tell us right here? We don't need to lime anymore. This person's probably been liming for a lot of years and probably doing it year after year. They finally took a soil sample and they said, whoa, I don't need to lime anymore, do I, Anthony? No, you really don't. If you was to lime and get it out of that 7.3 range, what happens then? Then those nutrients become unavailable to your root system. So this will show up a lot of times if you're adding lime year after year. Also, if you're in a greenhouse situation, you'll see where there's not a lot of rainfall, you'll see your pH start creeping up really high. The next thing you'll look at is your P and your K. This is the second and the third number of your fertilizer. You'll notice here that this is very high and high. Okay, and then the rest of it has S's on it, which means it's satisfactory. And then we've just got a range of our boron and our sodium out there. So what does this tell us? This is a garden. What do we need to add? Really, all we're needing is a little bit more nitrogen, and the nitrogen will help us. Now, we never test nitrogen, and there's several reasons for that. Nitrogen is on the move all the time. It's just moving like crazy. It's in the air, it's in us, it's in the ground, it's in the grass, it's just everywhere. And you can test it right now. That's in one spot, come back tomorrow and test again in that exact same spot, and it will be different because it's always a moving. So what we like to do is we will look at whatever you're growing, if it's a garden, if it's corn, if it's tomatoes, whatever it is, and we will give you a specific recommendation on nitrogen for that crop. Why? Because certain crops don't like nitrogen, certain crops do. So we'll give you a specific recommendation on nitrogen to fit the crop that you're growing. And then these are the things that we'll look at to see if we need to amend the soil or if we need to leave it alone. In this case, we're going to leave it alone. Why? Because we got very high and high, and our pH is at the top end. Everything else is satisfactory. So we're going to add a little nitrogen to help it along, and then we'll be done. We'll save some money on our fertilizer. And of course, as extension agents, that's why we're all here to help any way we possibly can. So I know we're going to talk a little bit about tomatoes tonight, and I know that's why some of you all tuned in, but I want to talk with you a little bit about the nutrients that truly is needed by a tomato plant. Potassium is one of those things that is extremely needed by not only tomatoes, but any fruiting vegetable plant. If it's peppers or if it's cucumbers or if it's watermelon, whatever is a fruiting type of plant, potassium is needed. And show you just how much potassium is needed in a tomato crop over an acre. It's pounds of actual units of potassium per season just for a tomato crop. That is a whole lot of potassium. So I also want to talk with you about, sometimes you get your potassium and your nitrogen and some of these other nutrients out of whack. And so I always look at, coming back to the basics, nitrogen should be at a ratio to potassium 1:2. So that's why, what I mean by that is, if I'm going to put 1 pound of nitrogen on, I should be putting on 2 pounds of potassium. Now, again, if we go back to the example where there's high potassium in the soil, we won't have to add that. But this gives you an idea of where we need to be looking at. So let's say if you go to the farm store and things of that nature, you'll see a lot of, some fertilizer bags. There'll be a 6, 12, 12, 24, I'm sorry, 24, because the fertilizer plants already know that you need that nitrogen for 1% versus 2% of everything else. So that's sometimes why that you're looking at some of these fertilizers that's in this 6, 12, 12 or 12, 24, 24. All right. So let's dive into just fertility in the fertilizer bag, since we're talking a little bit about it. So you're always going to pick one up, and you're always going to have 3 numbers. That's N. Nitrogen is you're going to be your first number. Nitrogen. And I always tell people this because this sometimes will help them understand how to fertilize their garden or whatever. But the first number, nitrogen, always grows the plant. Okay, it always is going to grow the plant. That's what nitrogen's job is. It loves to grow the plant. It'll help with the leaves. It helps with the structure of the stem. It grows the plant. It helps, elongate it. It helps bush it out. That's what nitrogen does. It is a plant grower. The second number, phosphate or P, the phosphates are all about the root system. It actually is there to grow the root system. Okay, that's what it's all, that underground stuff that you don't normally see. That's what the phosphorus, the middle number of fertilizer, actually does. Now, a lot of times you'll go to a farm store or something of that nature, and they'll have what they call a starter bag of fertilizer. It'll be something like an 8, 48, 10 or something of that nature. That middle number is extremely high. Why? Because you want to start your plants with a good, healthy root system and get that root system growing in the ground like it should. So first number, nitrogen, grows the plant. Second number, phosphate, phosphorus, it grows the root system. Third number is potassium or potash or K. What does it do? It truly helps grow the fruit. It's all about the fruit development. It's all about the structure of the fruit, developing the seeds, the gel that's inside of there. It's all about producing the fruit. So if you've got really small tomatoes and you got a whole garden full of tomatoes and they're real small, and there's all of them out there, put a little potassium or potassium nitrate on that and watch them kind of size up. And that's what that's for. Now, I've always want to talk about the units, the actual units you need versus how many pounds of fertilizer you put on, because they're totally different. you get a soil sample and it calls for, let's say, 30 actual units of nitrogen. That's what it's calls for. So what is 30 actual units? Well, in this bag of 10, 10, 10, let's don't look at how many pounds in it. Let's say there's 100 pounds in it, but in 100 pounds of whatever it is, 10, 10, 10, it takes 100 pounds to truly get 10 actual units of nitrogen. 100 pounds of fertilizer, if it's a 10, 10, 10, it takes 100 pounds to get 10 actual units of nitrogen. Let's say that your soil sample calls for 30 actual units of nitrogen. What does that mean? I need 300 pounds of triple 10. So I always like to explain that, because a lot of times in our soil samples, they'll say, we want so many units. It does not relate to how many pounds that you truly need. You have to kind of have to fit your needs with whatever fertilizer you're going to be using. All right, so there's all kinds of fertilizers out there. There's organic, that involves organic matter, composting, green manures or cover crops, liquid fertilizers. There's all kinds of organic stuff out there for that. The traditional methods, of course, is there are manures or cover crops. The things you go down here to the store, the 6-12-12s, the triple 19s. Now there's some liquid things out there now that is used more on a commercial scale, but can be readily gotten. It's be like a triple 20. A calcium nitrate, a potassium nitrate. There's a top K, there's a top kick. There's all kinds of different liquids, but you would mix this with water, and then this is readily available. Once you mix it with water and put it on the crop, it's readily available to the root system, and it just sucks it right on up and takes it right on into the crop. So those are quick fixes if you're in trouble. Some other organic options, there's Grow, there's fish emulsions, there's bone meal, there's blood meal, corn meal, kelps. There are just thousands of things out there. All of them will have these three numbers with the dashes in between them. That again, that they have to by law put that on what is truly in this product. In this case, 010 0, 12 0 0. So they have to legally broadcast that on their label to truly meet with all the laws. So you can actually find what you're truly needing. I throw this up. This is a deal that I put up for my commercial folk, but all kinds of ways. There's bare ground. You're just broadcasting and tilling it in. You can do some side fertilizing. You can just put your drip irrigation down and run it through the drip. There's overhead irrigation, which I do not recommend. Why? Because the more water that you add to the surface of a leaf, the more likely you're going to have a disease. So I try to keep away from the broadcast or from the overhead irrigation of water, just because we want that leaf to be as dry as possible to prevent any type of diseases. All right, so now we're going to get into the meat of it. What does my plant really need? And that's always a question that people will have. Let me grab a drink of water right quick. You can look at all these and say, well, I don't have a clue. I've seen that before, but what in the world is that? So hopefully we'll talk about some of these things that we're always will have trouble with in our gardens. Well, we got to start with the big three. The nitrogen is, of course, the first number on the fertilizer. The nitrogen always shows up when you need it is in the very top of the plant. You'll notice these are older leaves. See how green they are versus this is a more yellowing in the top growth in the growing buds here. They are actively growing plants. So you'll see that these are the ones that are growing and coming out really fast. And so these are going to be the yellow ones. The top part of the plant will be a yellow, and some of them will this kind of be a mottling color. So nitrogen affects the top of your plant. Yellowing is a nitrogen deficiency. All right. Now, let's don't get that confused with what I call actively growing. Now, if you're not been around a lot of tomatoes, or maybe if you have been around a lot of tomatoes, you may or may not know this. So when you walk into this greenhouse, if you'll kind of take a glance right down through there, you see what you would think might be, it's a changing of the color. You see a dark green. And is that yellow or is that green? You see a kind of a color change in the top of the plants. Well, let's take a closer look. And we start, once we pull it all the way up, this is not a true yellow. This is a pale green. Now, whenever a tip of any plant, most time it's a tomato, but you can see this on other plants. If the top of your plant is a pale green, then that means it's actively growing. That means everything is healthy. I've got enough water, I got enough nutrients, I got enough sunshine, the temperature's right, everything's going, and I'm just happy go lucky is what the plant's saying. But it has to be a pale yellow versus, I'm sorry, pale green versus a yellow. So don't get those two mixed up. A lot of times somebody will walk out and say, man, that, it needs some nitrogen. And they'll throw a bunch of nitrogen on it, and the plant elongates and it just gets all out of hand and have a lot of problems. So when you're looking at the tops of your plants will tell you what they truly need if you take enough time to truly look at them. Pale green, actively growing. Yellow, nitrogen deficiency. Just to drive that home, these two plants, this is a plant that is totally healthy. It's been given plenty of nitrogen, all that stuff. Everything's happy-go-lucky. Look how darker green. Look how many more branches that it has. It's in good shape. This is one that does not have enough nitrogen throughout the growing season. We see that it's sparse. It doesn't have as many branches. The leaves are not as abundant, and it's got a kind of a yellow tinge. It's a pale looking. Even down here on these lower leaves, which should be good and green, it's even pale green down there. So that tells me, and it doesn't show it all the way up here, but this is a yellowing all the way up in here. Well, it's not only a tomato problem, but whenever you don't have nitrogen in cucumbers, you'll see that they don't truly fully develop, and they'll kind of puckle. I guess sort of get real small and kind of turn a little bit at the end. So you'll start noticing there's some problems going on with my entire garden if you do truly have a nitrogen problem. I also throw this up. These are a lot of different varieties of tomatoes that we grow up here. And we grow all kinds of stuff, but I show this to show you that not all varieties are the same. Here, this Biltmore variety doesn't like a whole lot of nitrogen. It can get by with hardly any. Versus an Amelia or Florida 47 or something else likes a whole lot of nitrogen. So I say, whenever you're growing your gardens and you got your varieties, know your variety, because your variety may do terrible with too much nitrogen, or it may not do at all if you don't put any nitrogen on it. So know your variety whenever you're starting to grow. Start understanding, get some knowledge, look at the seed catalogs, do whatever it takes to kind of understand that variety so that you can fertilize it the very best way. Okay, our next thing is phosphorus, which is the middle number. And it always shows up as purpling. If you'll notice here, these veins are real purple. Still got the greenery in between the veins, but you see the veins are really purple. If you turn that over, it's really purple on the underside of that leaf. You'll notice here that it looks stunted. It doesn't want to grow. There's a lot of yellow specks. There's all kinds of things going on with this plant. Now, just because you see this doesn't truly mean you've got a phosphorus deficiency. You may have plenty of phosphorus in the ground and you still show up a phosphorus deficiency. Well, how's that even possible, Anthony, you may ask? Well, what happens if the temperature is too low? The plant's not actively growing, it'll start showing some phosphorus deficiency. If there is nematodes working on the roots, if there's grub worms working on the roots, and there's not enough root system downstairs, guess what? Phosphorus deficiency will start showing up. So just because you see phosphorus doesn't automatically say that I just need to add more fertilizer. It's a beginning of starting to do some investigation of what's going on. You may have a disease that's affecting the root system, and so that it can't take up phosphorus like it should. So phosphorus is one of those flag signs that say, hey, something's wrong. I need help. And then you have to figure out what the plant truly needs. So potassium or potash or K, which is the third number of fertilizer, is always showing up. Let me drink right quick. It always shows up on the older leaves of your plant. If you'll notice here, it'll always start kind of in the edges. It'll work its way around the plant leaf, and it starts working its way back toward the stem or the branch. And it usually doesn't affect the tops as much. So you'll see the lower leaves be turning yellow, and there's a problem. It's necrosis all the way around, yellowing all the way around that leaf. And you'll notice the top parts of the plants is green. That is a potassium deficiency. So if you've ever grown any tomatoes in a garden, you'll always see what they call the yellow shoulders. This is a potassium deficiency on every time you see this. Now, there's some other things that it could be confused with, but in most cases, this is what they call a potassium deficiency or yellow shoulders. Now, this tomato has got plenty of potassium. Notice the seed that's in here, the seed pods. You'll notice there's jelly down all those, and it's developed the way it's supposed to. Look at this one that does not have enough potassium. There's a large white core. It's not developed the seed pods like it should. It's really hard down in there. So you'll see this. You cut it open, and there'll be a huge core to some of your tomatoes that is potassium deficiency. Just to kind of drive that point home, just notice here the lower limbs are what is being affected, and the tops are good and green. I'm going to deal with a few micronutrients, but still extremely needed. Magnesium is one of the ones that you see whenever plants are more mature. They're starting to get a little bit older, and usually it's the leaves that are closest to the ground or closest to where the root system is. And they'll start turning yellowing. This is not maybe the very best picture, but let me show you this one right here. Everybody has seen this in most cases. If you've ever grown a tomato, you've seen that somewhere. And usually the plants are older, they're taller. This is on the lower branches. You'll see this yellow mottling type of color, and that is a Epsom salts or magnesium deficiency. So how do you prevent that? Well, Epsom salts is our go-to, and it actually works. Especially on tomatoes, I like putting these out whenever the plant gets at least knee high, or maybe just right before, maybe shin high. I like putting my Epsom salts on about 4 tablespoons in a gallon of water every other week. Don't do it every week, but do it every other week. You need to skip a week in between there, unless you've got just a really, really bad problem like this one is showing up right here. This is a drastic deficiency right here. So you can apply Epsom salts directly to the plant, to the ground, through the drip system. There's just getting some Epsom salts on. What happens is the Epsom salt, the magnesium, just is kind of like us taking vitamins. It just kind of gives a shot of health to our plants. It starts working the chemistry inside the plant, just makes it a little bit more healthier. And a healthy plant will fight off diseases, insects, and all kinds of problems. So just keeping your plants healthy, and Epsom salts is one of those tricks to kind of do that, will help you in the long run. And if you've ever grown any fruiting varieties of peppers or tomatoes or watermelons or cucumbers or whatnot, you've seen calcium deficiency, which it's called blossom end rot. Now, it's the end that's not connected to the plant turns black or brown, and it just sort of rots, and it just sort of decays the entire bottom end of that tomato or whatever you're looking at. And it also gets up into it, will cause some blackening, and it just kind of rot. But there's only 2 things that truly brings on calcium deficiency. One is you don't have any calcium. Or 2, the weather is so dry, there's plenty of calcium maybe in the ground, but the weather's so dry that there's not enough moisture to grab a hold of the calcium and take it up into the root system and take it up into the plant. So how do you solve that? Well, let me first tell you why the plants need calcium. Anytime that you have, let's say a tomato, pepper, whatever it is, that first flower will pop open. And it's at that moment, whenever that first tomato starts forming, and it's just so very small, that plant is starved to death for calcium. It's got to have it. It's just you can't go without it. And if it doesn't have it, your whole first cluster of tomatoes have blossom end rot, or your cucumbers or whatever you're looking at. So I like putting, especially whenever I transplant, most time I'm transplanting tomatoes or peppers or whatever you're transplanting, I like putting on some type of calcium source at that moment. And then as the weather gets dry, then I like to put on a little bit extra water and just help the moisture level in the soil so it can be able to take up the calcium that's already there. Hopefully all this is making sense. I like to throw in boron also, because there's a lot of trade magazines and a lot of things that's starting to talk more and more about boron. And boron is one of those things where if you don't use it right, you've used it wrong. And so most time you don't see a whole lot of boron deficiency, but boron is one of those things where you can add to help boost the yield of whatever you're growing. But guess what? If you use too much boron, it's just as bad as not having any boron at all. So no more than 2 to 3 pounds of active boron per acre, or in a small garden spot, 100, maybe 100 by 50 area, no more than a quarter of a pound of active boron over that entire plot right there. You'll notice here that boron, there's no gel in between these seeds and the outer wall. There's no gel. That's boron's part of boron's job, is to help form some of that gel. We don't see this very, very often, but you'll see some zinc deficiencies in your tomatoes and on your garden. If you've been in a garden spot for year after year after year, you could possibly see some zinc deficiencies, but it's very rare to see this. And this is one of these things where it's extremely hard to pinpoint, is it truly zinc deficiency, because there's a lot of different things that sort of looks like this if you're not careful. We have their veins are real green and everything else is in between yellow, but there's no, with zinc you have to kind of notice it, because this will show up in different areas. So it might show up top, may show up in the middle, it may show up in the bottom of the plant. So you have to kind of, most time people will see this, say, oh, I need to add whatever. And they add that and it doesn't work. And they say, well, I don't know what else is going on. Well, you added this, but it didn't work. So you have to almost eliminate some things to figure out what exactly is going on with your plant. See some iron deficiency, but this is at the top of the plant. It's really yellowing at the very tops. This again could be confused with nitrogen. One of these things, what you would do is if it turns yellow, you have a lot of yellowing at the top. If it's truly not at the growing tip, then you might think that it's an iron deficiency. Or if you've got plenty of nitrogen, you put on plenty of fertilizer and this shows up, then you say, okay, that it's probably an iron deficiency. And this is not something that you see normally, but I always like throwing some things out there that people hasn't seen, just to kind of wet your whistle. Manganese is one of those things that happens in a real young plant, and you start seeing some things that look very similar. And you almost have to figure out, and manganese is not, it shouldn't be confused with magnesium, because they're totally two different things and they work totally different. The manganese works in the young plants or in the top of the plant. I set out a couple of pictures of fusarium wilts and some diseases. This can be not only on tomatoes, but all kinds of stuff. But fusarium wilt, again, is that disease that is in the soil. And if you can just get your pH up around that 6.5 and above, then naturally your soil will fight off this wilts being taken up into your plant. But you'll notice here, half of this branch is yellow and the other half is green. And here they call this the yellow flagging disease, because you'll be looking at your field and all of a sudden you just see a big old yellow plant that just looks like it's dying. I'll show you how that is. This is the stem right at the ground. You can cut that open and cross section, and you'll see that it's gotten real hard. You got brown, and it's just real tough. It's kind of just tightening up, and it's closing all the roadways going up and down. So just letting you know what's going on here, and you'll see that from time to time, especially if your pH is lower. And with that, I will take any questions that's in the chat box or wherever.
All right. Thank you, Anthony. Folks, if you've got some questions, and I see one in there at the bottom of your screen, there's a little icon that says chat. It'll bring up a white box on the side of your screen, and you can type your message there. If you've got a question, type that on the screen, and I'll read them off for Anthony. Anthony, there is one question in here with Mr. Mark Hurd from Silver Point, Tennessee, just down the road here. Asked the question of, is there such a thing as over liming for tomatoes? Too much lime.
Yes. Um, Whenever you get your pH above 7.3, things start to get harder for the roots to take up. So that 7.3 is sort of your go-to, let's stop, this is the limit, I'm not going to fall off the cliff type of mark. So uh, a lot of times if your pH is up high, I would test it and find out what's going on. If your pH is too high, or is at the end, and you want to add some calcium, some other things, you can also look at using some gypsum. Gypsum is a great source of calcium, and it actually helps the structure of your soil whenever you use it. So I like using some gypsum, and there's some things out there that you could possibly use, but I like gypsum a little bit more because you are getting that calcium that the plant needs anyway, and you're helping the structure of your soil. If you've got a real tight soil or you buy a hard pan or something of that nature, putting some gypsum on that will actually kind of soften that soil up, makes it a little bit easier for tilling and for the root systems to go down.
Yeah. I got a question. I know you're there in Grainger County as the extension agent up there, and I'm sure a lot of the producers that you work with on the commercial side, are they using a lot of grafted tomatoes up there?
We some, not all, but some. Grafting is we're seeing a lot of benefits from grafting, but the downfall is it costs at least double to truly purchase or truly get a grafted plant. Why? Because you're growing two different plants, and so you've got double the amount of expense that's involved in it. But now you are getting plenty of benefits. You've got a better root system. You've got a stronger, healthier plant. You've got bigger stems. You've got healthier branches. Uh, you do have a bump in yield depending on what scion and root uh, uh, that you actually use. So there's some definite benefits, but again, it's double the cost. Now you may some of the folks on tonight may just have a small garden. If you have an opportunity to try some grafted plants, as say you go to a local greenhouse or something of that nature, and they've got grafted plants versus non-grafted, I would probably look at the grafted plants just to at least plant a few of them and see how they differ and then your normal varieties.
Okay. I'm gonna put you on the spot here, Anthony, and I got some more
That's
questions
okay.
in the chat box here.
Sure.
These are just mine, and then I'll be done. I'll let the chat box keep filling up. What is your favorite, let's say, name me three, your top three favorite tomato varieties for homeowners in the home garden?
Well, if you can get Celebrity, if you can get Celebrity Supreme or Fabulous, if you can get Empire or Imperatas, Big Boys. I like trying, and those are really kind of flavored tomatoes. Now, some of
Yeah.
those will crack a little bit more whenever if you have a drastic weather change, they'll get a little bit more cracking or something of that nature going on. But the flavor by far is just really extreme. So
That's and
I like
that's
sticking with the flavor.
that's what that home gardener wants is that flavor for sure. I got a question here, Anthony. Miss Vanessa Garrett asks, can my local extension agent provide color copies of these deficiencies for garden comparison as plants grow and problems occur?
What I can
Deficiencies.
do, I can send this to you all via email, and
Okay,
then I'll maybe send it to you.
that'd be fine.
Well, or I'll send it to Bill, either one, and we'll try to get that. And then
Yeah.
let me while I'm on that subject, let me do this. If you're ever searching the web and things of that nature, and you're doing some Google searches or something of that nature, type in whatever you're looking for and put the word extension at the end of it. Now, what that does is it brings up research-based information from all over the country. Try to use the surrounding our state and surrounding states if possible for certain things. But if there's a lot of misinformation out there. And so there's a lot of blogs and things of that nature where people really don't know what they're talking about. It sounds like they do, but if it's not research based, how do you truly know? I've seen some really calamities that, they put this on and it was totally opposite. So do your research that way. If you're going to do some Googling and things of that nature, put in the word extension at the end of your search and it'll bring up
Yes.
a wealth of information.
Yes. I try to tell people that all the time. That's a great suggestion. Next question. How is calcium packaged and how do we apply it? Calcium. How's it
Okay.
packaged?
There is all kinds of ways. You can get some in the liquid form, or sometimes you get like calcium nitrate is can come in like a fertilizer bag, but it's meant to be mixed with water before you apply it, and it makes it readily available. So it's just like a granular that you mix with water and you just put it on like fertilizer. Now you can side dress that, just take that bag and side dress your plants or whatever and let it rain it in. So there's all kinds of ways of doing the same thing, but usually you can get the granulars, you can get the gypsum's more of a powder type, but it's got a real major source of calcium in it as well. So it depends on what your local stores are carrying, and then just go and ask some questions and then see what, so there's different ways you can do the same thing.
Thank you, Anthony. Next question. A good question. Debbie Wright says, I normally always put a Tums tablet, antacid Tums tablet, in my hole before planting a tomato plant. She wants to know, is it okay to do this with pepper and cucumber plants as well?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Any fruiting vegetable plant, it
Yeah.
needs calcium.
Calcium.
That
Yeah.
first flower.
That's a good instant way of getting it in the hole and getting it to the roots.
Oh,
yeah. Any other questions? That's all I see right now, Anthony. We'll give them another few seconds here. If somebody's got a question, type it in the chat. We'll ask. We've had Mr. Anthony Carver from Grainger County online tonight. We appreciate everybody that's been on here with us. We got about 30 people have been joining us, Anthony, so that's really good. Good turnout tonight, folks. If you're listening, we'll probably be we're planning on a fall series for the Zoom series like we've done here this spring. So be looking for some information from your extension office on our fall Zoom series. We thank everyone for being on here. Anthony, we thank you very much. Last question. I see one just popped in here before I let you go. It says, best control for bacterial leaf spot.
loaded question. I love it. Bacteria is our main disease in tomatoes, in most of our crops in our gardens. So bacteria, it's already there. I mean, we got so much humidity that's in our air that we are always going to have trouble with bacteria. And especially after rains, after more moisture is in the air, there's going to be a lot of bacteria issues. There's some 3 or 4 major diseases that are tied to bacteria, but copper is a good one that I would have on hand. And copper is, of course, organic, and you would use that with I'll try to do that maybe at least every 10 days or something of that nature. All that does is it sort of coats it, and it kind of it sort of coats your leaves and things of that nature, and kind of helps buffer some of that moisture that would be on the leaf surface. After rain, let's say you let it dry a little bit after rain, then hit it with some copper. That would help. There's a product called, if it gets extremely bad, you might want to look at a product called Oxidate. Oxidate is kind of like peroxide, I guess is a better way of saying it. But what happens is, if you got a really bad problem, you hit it with Oxidate by itself. You hit it with Oxidate. What that does is it opens up those spores of that bacteria. You come back in with copper or maybe some daconil or maybe some fungonil and spray it. Or you might even want to use like mancozeb. There's all kinds of different ones out there, diethane, and those are all readily you could get. But you spray it, and then it will kill that and truly take it away. But a lot of times, if you've got a really bad problem, oxidate is the way to start, and then you go from there.
Another question was thrown back in here on calcium. Miss Bridget Mays asked, what do you think about using eggshells to add calcium?
Anything you can do to add calcium is fine. Now, I like putting quite a bit. The better you can crush those up before you throw them down in there, the better it will be. It takes our soils has got to break things down. It takes bacteria and other things in the soils to break things down. And so the smaller that those particles are of the eggs will release more calcium and at quicker times. So I like if you do put eggshells or something of that nature, just if you could, I know it's a little messy, but I would crush them a little bit more uh, when you put them down.
Yep, good answer. All right.